Hi, I'm Chris. In my channel, I typically share contents on the courses that I teach, but in this video, I'm doing something a little bit differently. While I hope the content is still educational, or at the very least informational, I'm taking a bit of a different approach. For those who'd like to see the same content but in Bahasa Indonesia, I will make that available for you as well. So in this video, I will talk to you about my experience with COVID-19. Yes, I am indeed COVID positive as of right now. I just had my swab sample taken for the third time today, and I hope it will come out negative. But first, let me backtrack on how I was diagnosed with the novel coronavirus in the first place, the responses and actions that followed, and my 5 tips for those of you who are dealing with COVID-19 or are worried about it, as most of us probably are. Back in mid-October 2020, my uncle and aunt started getting sick. They weren't sure if it were COVID-related symptoms, so they had themselves checked out. Several times, actually, in several different health facilities. Mind you, we don't live in the same house. So one weekend, I think it was the 10th or 11th of October, I visited them briefly. I kept my distance, I wore my mask, I took every precaution. The visit didn't last long. It was only about 5 to 10 minutes. I just wanted to check on them. The weird thing is that despite some symptoms like high fever, cough, difficulty eating, they were only required to undergo rapid testing, which came out negative. Twice. It seemed, they said, it was really difficult to request a swab test since they didn't show severe symptoms or difficulty breathing. They were not in contact with someone who had been diagnosed with COVID positive before. Instead, the doctors suspected other things like typhoid fever and or dengue fever. So a few days had gone by, my uncle still hadn't recovered. My aunt took my uncle to the hospital again, and this time he was admitted for typhoid fever as he was severely dehydrated, was having difficulty eating and holding his food down. Only on the second day after being admitted to the hospital did my uncle get tested for COVID-19. Finally, the swab test. This was on October 18th or 19th. So since my aunt and uncle were both in isolation in the hospital, and my 2 younger cousins were at home alone, I was asked to stay with them to take care of them. You may call it babysitting, but as they are not babies anymore, maybe we'll just call it teenager sitting. So I started living in their house with my cousins. Then on October 20th, my uncle's test results came out positive. Since the rule is that if anyone in the family member who has tested positive for the novel coronavirus, then the entire household must voluntarily quarantine. We did just that. And we notified the local authority in our neighborhood, and from there, swift actions were taken. Almost immediately, someone from the local community health center, or Puskesmas, called us, told us the rules that we must adhere to, and arranged for swab tests for all family members. There were 4 of us. They also told us if we chose to refuse the swab test, we must self-quarantine for 14 days. If we do the swab test and it comes out negative, then we could proceed with our lives as normal. But if it comes out positive, then we must move to one of the centralized quarantine facilities provided by the government. All costs would have been covered by the government. We decided to do the swab test anyway. It's just the responsible thing to do. 2 days later, on October 22nd, we had our first swab test taken. Myself, my 2 cousins, and my aunt. She was given permission to leave the hospital temporarily to take this test. Even though she was staying and taking care of my COVID positive uncle in the same hospital room, the hospital itself where she had stayed did not do any test on her. Instead, she joined us with the free government program. The result came out on the evening on October 25th. All 4 of us had tested positive, and we were instructed to join the mandatory quarantine the next day. We were assigned to a place in Kuta, right here. So we went to this place in Kuta. Mind you, we were taken by ambulance, and it was quite a thrilling ride. And I've been here for 10 days now. The place where I'm staying is not a hotel, but it's an adequate accommodation. The catering is good, the food is good, except they give us snake skin fruit almost every day. I got tired of it. Plus, it makes my throat itchy. Otherwise, the food is good. I was able to do my work from here, even though there's no Wi-Fi. So I've had to use my phone internet connection and use tethering to my other devices. We were also given honey mixture twice a day and this inhaler therapy as well. We don't have to pay for anything. So shout out to the Indonesian government and the Bali provincial government for this. I'm quite okay with what's provided. I appreciate what they've done. That being said, a part of me also think that this is quite a bit of a waste. I would have been compliant with the quarantine order anyway. I would have stayed home for 14 days and would have reported to the authorities if I'd experienced any symptoms, which I have not. Surely placing me in mandatory quarantine like this costs a good sum of money. Money that could have been better used for providing care for those who are truly sick, providing more testing, etc. Perhaps they could put in place a better screening procedure that allows those who are asymptomatic to quarantine and report every so often, to do self-quarantine. On the other hand, I get it. Many people, even those who have tested positive, would have tried to carry on with their lives if they were asymptomatic, and thus risking further spread and outbreak. Now, so far, I've had 3 swab tests. The first was on October 22nd in the regional public hospital. This was the first time I tested positive, which led me to being quarantined. The second one was here in Kuta, in the place of quarantine, on October 29th. It still came out positive. This was perhaps because I had just contracted the virus while staying at my aunt and uncle's. Meanwhile, my cousins both tested negative and was allowed to continue their 7 days of self-quarantine at home. The third swab test was this morning, for which I'm still awaiting result. Either way, positive or negative, they'd send me home tomorrow to continue an additional 7 days of self-quarantine. Perhaps this is because the budget allocated per person was only set to cover 11 days of centralized quarantine. I don't know. I'm just excited to be going home. Now, what are some lessons learned from this experience? Allow me to share the 5 lessons I've learned when dealing with COVID-19. I call this PQRST. P. Protect yourself and others. I should have been more careful. I've always been careful with exposure to COVID-19. I see a lot of people in my line of work in different events, functions, and capacities. I do this to protect not only myself, but also the people around me who I care about. I may have been complacent when I started staying at my aunt and uncle's. I should have known better, and even though I still wore my mask when I was staying there, I washed my hands and cleaned the surfaces, I didn't keep my mask on when I was sleeping. And I neglected to consider that my cousins could have been positive as well. So I knew I let my guard down. But at the same time, they needed someone, an adult, to help take care of them, as one of my cousins is just a teenager and the other one has a disability. So they needed help, and one of us from the close-knit families would have needed to be there for that. So I took on the responsibility. I'm glad I did. And I'm thankful that I only experienced a very mild repercussion from the virus. The worst that I've experienced was slight discomfort on my throat, no cough or anything. I'm also glad that when I was at work on the 19th and 20th of October, prior to my uncle's prognosis, my interaction with my colleagues at work was very limited. I had a lot of online meetings at the time, so we didn't have any close contacts, and especially we didn't have lunches together. I heard that many people get exposed when they have lunch together, since you can't wear your mask while you're eating. My exposure to my mom and my grandparents who are living with me in my house was also limited, since when I decided to help take care of my cousins, I was already prepared to live there and not go back and forth. At least wait until my aunt and uncle came home from the hospital. That was the plan anyway. So the bottom line is that you have to protect yourself and others. One of the best advices that I've heard recently about the coronavirus is to look at it as if you're already positive. So when you wear your mask, wash your hands, and keep a safe distance, you're doing it not only to keep yourself from being exposed, but rather to keep yourself from exposing others. The Q stands for quarantine. If you're feeling unwell or have anyone close to you who is showing symptoms of COVID-19, the very least you should do is to impose self-quarantine measures. It is the responsible thing to do. The R is for rest. If you experience severe or mild symptoms, your body needs rest. That said, while I was in quarantine for the past 10 days, I have had so many reports, budget plannings, and other work-related stuff that's due. I continued on working, sometimes until late at night. This could have been detrimental for me, actually, but I'm thankful it didn't. I did try to take several little naps throughout the day and just rest. I haven't seen the world outside of this quarantine place for a while, and that's okay. S is for staying positive. By this, I don't mean that I wish to remain COVID positive for a long time, but rather I think we should try to remain upbeat about all of this. There's a good quote that says, "We're all facing the same storm, but we're in different boats." Every one of us seems to be affected by COVID-19 in different ways. Our responses to the stimulus, this challenge that we are facing, is in fact more important than the challenge itself. So, stay positive. Finally, T. Take your time. Your body needs time to recover, so be sure to take your time. Hopefully your work and life situation allows you to do this. Also, take time to exercise, get some sun when that's possible, and appreciate the little things in life. Any moment or experience, no matter how terrible or exciting, no matter positive or negative, will eventually pass. Nothing is forever, and you have to continuously convince yourself that this too will pass. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you stay inspired and be inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button for further contents.